and welcome to your next unit. We'll be crash coursing photosynthesis and cellular respiration over the last couple days. Those two things together make up what is called the cell energy cycle. We're going to go from how plant cells and algae cells make energy through the process of photosynthesis, or make food through the process of photosynthesis, and how we can, along with all types of cells, take that food and use a process called cellular respiration to make ATP molecules that we can use for energy. So let's get going right here. And in order to understand how photosynthesis works, you have to understand there is a special structure, and we mentioned this in the previous unit when we did cell structure and function, and that special structure is called a chloroplast. You can see a picture here of a chloroplast, and I'm going to just go through the different parts here with you of this, and you'll need to pay attention to these as we go through. But one of the things you need to remember that we talked about in the previous unit is that there is an outer and inner membrane. It has a double membrane, and within the inner membrane we see some stacks of what look like, I guess you could call stacks of pancakes or whatever, but these things actually have names. Okay. Each one of those little pancakes, or each one of those little sacs, is known as a thylakoid. Okay, within the thylakoid is a substance or an area called the lumen, and those stacks of thylakoids are known as granum. Now, there is also a fluid outside the granum that is called the stroma. And you will find out that different parts of photosynthesis occur within different parts of the chloroplast as we move along. Okay, so why are there so many membranes? Why are there so many thylakoids inside each chloroplast? The key is what the job of the chloroplast is, and that is to capture sunlight. And the more thylakoids you have, the more sunlight you can capture. That is why there are so many thylakoids. Okay. Now, within each of these thylakoids, which in that is something or a substance called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a pigment, and it appears green. That's what makes leaves green on plants. That's why the stems of plants are green, is because they contain chlorophyll inside their chloroplast, and this can be found in all plants and algae. Why is that? Why do they appear green in color? It is because chlorophyll absorbs mainly the blue and red portions of the electromagnetic spectrum by reflecting the green light. So we see what gets reflected. To get a better understanding of that, here is your visible spectrum. You can see where the blue, the green, the yellow, orange, and red are located. There are two types of chlorophyll, chlorophyll A being the primary pigment and chlorophyll B being a secondary pigment. A is the one that does most of the absorbing, as I said. It is the photosynthesis, and it absorbs the blue-violet end and the orange-red end. Okay, chlorophyll B, as I said, is an accessory pigment. It does absorb a little bit of the green light while also capturing some of the yellow. Okay, but most of our energy is captured by chlorophyll A. Now, that gets us to the process of photosynthesis itself. We now understand we need chloroplast filled with chlorophyll so that we can capture the sunlight. What does photosynthesis mean? Synthesis means to make. Photo means light, so the word itself literally means to put together with light. So, what are we putting together? We're going to take some carbon dioxide, or the plant, I should say, takes carbon dioxide and water, and with energy from the sun is going to make a special type of food that we call glucose. Okay, and here is the chemical reaction. Again, carbon dioxide and water are put together using sunlight through the process of photosynthesis, and they make a food, C6H12O6. We talked about this as one of our principal glucose monosaccharides. And we also get a waste product, or plants also produce a very important waste product to us called oxygen, because all living things on the planet need oxygen. Okay, now the sixes that you see in front of the carbon dioxide and water and oxygen simply tell you the number of molecules that are needed and get produced. You'll notice there's no 6 in front of the glucose. That's understood to be 1. So each time photosynthesis occurs, we get 1 molecule of glucose. Thankfully, this is an ongoing process that continues to make glucose molecules continuously. Okay, now we can divide the photosynthesis up into 2 parts. The first part is what's called the light-dependent reactions. It's obviously named the light-dependent reactions because this is where sunlight is needed. Okay, an overview of this reaction is simply sunlight plus water. So this is where the water comes in that we said plants have to take in. The sunlight is used to break down water, mainly to get the hydrogen out of there, what we will call some high energy electrons, and from that we can produce ATP and NADPH, and I have color coded those red to indicate that these are energy molecules. These are short-term energy molecules that will be reused during the process of photosynthesis. Okay, it is during these light-dependent reactions that we get that important gas that plant gives off, oxygen. Okay, this part of photosynthesis occurs across the thylakoid membranes. You can remember why I asked, do plants have so many inner membranes? It is so they can capture sunlight, because this is what is happening during that process. Okay, we are making some short-term energy molecules, ATP and NADPH, which are going to be reused in the second part for us to carry out and produce glucose. It is also during this part that we are going to produce some oxygen. Now, I will tell you the light-dependent reactions is made up of 3 parts. That is Photosystem 2, the ETC, or what we call the electron transport chain, and then Photosystem 1. Okay, I know it seems funny that we start with Photosystem 2 and end Photosystem 1, but that is how the process works, so try not to get confused about that. Try to remember that when we take our quiz later on. But again, we'll work through all these 3 processes. I'll explain to you what is going on in each one of those. Okay, so let's start with Photosystem 2, the first part of the light-dependent reactions. Okay, this is where chlorophyll captures photons. Photons are light. Photons travels in waves and as particles, or light travels as waves and as particles called photons. These photons, this solar energy is used to break up the water molecules. Okay, so again, we need water molecules for Photosystem 2. When this happens, we get 2 electrons, we get 2 hydrogen ions, and we get an oxygen atom. So again, the products of Photosystem 2, all of them being very important, are 2 electrons, 2 hydrogen ions, and 1 oxygen atom. Okay, so basically we are taking the hydrogens and separating them from the oxygens. That is what's taking place in Photosynthesis 2. The oxygen is then released into the air as O2, or atmospheric night oxygen. Okay, so there is Photosystem 2 in a nutshell. We break up water into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen gets released. That gets us to what is called the electron transport chain, or ETC. Again, this is what's taking place across, again, the thylakoid membrane. You can see where the stroma is and where the thylakoid space is, or the lumen. And what happens here is those electrons that were created in Photosystem 2 power special types of proteins. So we have, again, protein pumps. We've talked about protein pumps before. And these proteins pump the hydrogen ions inside the thylakoids into the lumen. Okay, So we're going to use the electrons, and electrons basically are energy. They provide energy to run the pumps that move the hydrogen ions inside the thylakoids. After these electrons give up their energy to move the hydrogen ions across the membrane, they then move on and will be reused in Photosystem 1. Okay, so we had Photosystem 2, we break apart the water, we get some electrons, high energy electrons, some hydrogen ions, and give off oxygen. The electrons are used to power the protein pumps in the electron transport chain to move the hydrogen ions inside the thylakoids, and then those electrons pass on to Photosystem 1. So let's move on then to Photosystem 1. What happens during Photosystem 1? Sunlight again re-energizes the electrons. So we're using photo light in both Photosystem 2 and 1. We're energizing these electrons. The electrons become re-energized. That energy is then, or can be, or the next thing I should say that happens, those hydrogen ions that got pumped in are joined to NADPH. And the energy from the electrons is then used to join the NADPH and hydrogen ions together to make a short-term energy molecule called NADPH. Okay, NADPH. After this takes place, we are, or as a part of the Photosystem 1, I should say, an ending process of Photosystem 1 is something called chemiosmosis. Sorry about that. This is where ATP gets produced. We've already produced the NADPH in Photosystem 1. Now we need to produce the ATP that I told you that also gets produced. Okay. In order to do that, we need a special enzyme. That's the ASE ending. That's what you see right there in the synthase. That enzyme helps ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, to join with another phosphate group. Okay, and again, we need some high energy electrons to help us with this, to provide the energy. And when the ADP joins with the phosphate group, we end up with ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Again, that ATP and NADPH are going to be used later on. Okay, so here it is an equation. Again, the ADP, we have those hydrogen ions that had gotten pumped in during the electron transport chain. They help join the phosphate to the ADP, and we end up with ATP. We have chemiosmosis. That is the first half of photosynthesis. The first half of photosynthesis. In the next video, I am going to be talking to you about the second half of second half of photosynthesis, and some factors that can affect the rate of photosynthesis as it occurs.